Mama Efua was the kind of woman everyone in Kumasi respected. A widow for more than 20 years, she had raised her children on her own and built a life many could only dream of. Piece by piece, she worked and saved until her estate was worth over $3 million. Land scattered across the city, houses rented out to tenants, and investments that kept growing steadily. People often said her strength was unmatched, and her wisdom showed in everything she touched. On the day of her only son Kojo's wedding, she was dressed in rich Kent, her gold jewelry gleaming in the sun. The courtyard was alive with drumming, dancing, and laughter. Everyone was celebrating, but Mama Efua's sharp eyes noticed something that made her heart heavy. As she looked at her new daughter-in-law, Adwoa, she didn't see the glow of a bride in love. Instead, she caught a different expression, cold, sharp, calculating, as if Adwoa wasn't looking at a family, but at a fortune. Still, Mama Efua smiled and kept her dignity. She knew this was Kojo's day, and she didn't want shadows on it. But later, during the wedding dinner, fate confirmed her fears. While passing near the tables, she overheard Adwoa giggling with her friend. The words cut like a knife. Soon, I'll be the one controlling everything Mama Efua owns. Just wait. Mama Efua paused, her smile never leaving her face. Inside, though, she felt the celebration turning bitter. The drums still beat, but now she heard a warning in their rhythm. Mama Efua did not sleep well after the wedding. The sound of Adwoa's voice kept echoing in her ears, that careless laugh, and those words about controlling everything. She was heartbroken, but if she was honest with herself, she wasn't surprised. From the very first time Kojo brought Adwoa home, something in the young woman's eyes had unsettled her. It wasn't the way she smiled or spoke, but the way she looked around the house, studying the furniture, the land, the small details, as if she was calculating value instead of building. Still, Mama Efua had held her tongue. She wanted her son to be happy. He was her only boy, the pride of her old age, and after all her sacrifices, she didn't want to be the reason he turned away from love. So, she kept her doubts quiet, though her heart carried the weight of them. When she once tried to gently warn Kojo, he brushed it off. "Mama, you're too suspicious. Not every woman is after your money. Adwoa loves me." His words were said with the firmness of a man in love, but also with the blindness that comes with it. Mama Efua had sighed deeply that day. She knew Kojo's heart was soft, too soft sometimes. He saw the world with kindness, but she had lived long enough to know that kindness could be taken advantage of. Greed was not new to Mama Efua. She had faced it all her life. Relatives who tried to cheat her after her husband died, business partners who wanted to steal from her, neighbors who grew jealous of her success. She had fought all of them and stood her ground. That was how she built her estate, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, never letting anyone take what was rightfully. Her scars had made her wise. So when she heard Adwoa's careless boasting at the wedding, she knew immediately what kind of battle was coming. This was no ordinary daughter-in-law, no simple mistake of a young man's heart. This was greed dressed in lace and gold. It would smile sweetly in public and plot silently in private. Mama Efua's heart ached, not because she was afraid for her wealth, but because she feared for Kojo. Her son loved with open hands, and open hands could easily be emptied. That night, as the wedding drums faded and guests went home, Mama Efua sat alone in her room. The noise of celebration was gone, replaced by the quiet wisdom of an old widow who had seen too much. She whispered to herself, "Kojo may not see it now, but I do. I know the difference between love and hunger." She tightened her wrapper, as if bracing herself. The battle was not yet here, but it was coming. And when it came, she would not be caught unprepared. It did not take long after the wedding for Adwoa's true colors to start showing. At first, she acted sweet, serving Mama Efua tea in the mornings and smiling as though she wanted to be the perfect daughter-in-law. But that sweetness was short-lived. Within weeks, she began making small comments about how things should be run differently in the household. Soon, those small comments turned into demands. Adwoa would walk around the compound, pointing at the tenants' houses and the lands as if they were already hers. She would say, "This place needs a younger hand. Mama Efua has done well, but now it's time for us to manage things." She didn't even hide it anymore. She spoke as though she and Kojo had already inherited everything, as if Mama Efua was just a visitor in her own estate. Kojo, who loved peace, started repeating his wife's words. "Mama, maybe you should rest. Adwoa can help manage things." His tone was soft, but it carried Adwoa's influence. Mama Efua would only smile, though inside she felt the sting. She knew Kojo's heart, and she knew he was only saying these things because Adwoa pushed him to. The hardest part came during family gathering. Adwoa, bold and careless, would mock Mama Efua in front of relatives. Once, when an uncle praised Mama Efua for her wisdom in building such a strong estate, Adwoa laughed and said loudly, "Ah, but the future belongs to me now. Very soon, everything will be under my care." The words hung in the air, sharp and disrespectful. Some relatives shifted uncomfortably, others pretended not to hear, but everyone felt the insult. Mama Efua simply sat straight, her face calm. She had lived too long to waste energy on arguments, especially with someone so shallow. Kojo sat by quietly during these moments, torn between the two women he loved most. He looked at his mother with guilt but said nothing. He looked at Adwoa with unease, but still could not correct her. He wanted peace, but his silence only made things worse. To Adwoa, his weakness was permission. To Mama Efua, his weakness was pain. Each day, Adwoa grew bolder. She started calling tenants directly, trying to involve herself in matters of rent and land without Mama Efua's knowledge. She would lock herself in the sitting room with Kojo, whispering about plans and investments she had no right to touch. Mama Efua watched quietly, her mind sharp, her heart steady. She had faced storms before, and she knew this one would not be any different. Behind her calm smile, she was already thinking ahead. Adwoa's fake love had revealed itself too quickly, and Kojo was too blinded to see it. But Mama Efua knew. Patience and wisdom were her strongest weapon. And in time, Adwoa would learn that mocking an old woman was far easier than outsmarting her. Mama Efua had lived long enough to know that shouting never wins a battle. Arguments only give the enemy your strength. So while Adwoa strutted around the compound, talking about how the future belongs to me, Mama Efua kept her lips sealed and her face calm. She did not fight, she did not complain. Instead, she began to plan, silently, carefully, and with the wisdom of a woman who had faced greed before. Late at night, after the compound grew quiet, Mama Efua would sit at her wooden desk with a lamp burning low. There, she began listing every property she owned, every piece of land, every account, every investment. It was her life's work, built with sweat and sacrifice. She wasn't about to let it fall into the hands of a woman who laughed about her behind her back. One morning, she made her way to the office of her longtime lawyer, a man she trusted deeply. They had worked together for years, and he knew her story well. Sitting across from him, she explained her fears in a steady voice. "I want to protect my legacy," she said. "I don't want my son's blindness or his wife's hunger to destroy everything I built." The lawyer nodded. He had seen too many families torn apart by greed. Together, they drafted new papers, moving her assets into a trust that only she controlled and updating her will with ironclad detail. Every loophole was closed. Every word was chosen to protect her estate from grasping hands. Mama Efua signed the documents with a firm hand. It was more than just ink on paper. It was a shield for her children and grandchildren, a wall that Adwoa could never climb. She told no one except a few trusted friends. These were people who had stood by her for decades, people who had no interest in her wealth. They kept her secrets safe. Meanwhile, in the house, life went on as usual. Adwoa continued her little performances, pretending she was already the new madam of the estate. She boasted to relatives, gave orders to tenants, and whispered schemes to Kojo. She had no idea that every move she made was useless, because the foundation had already shifted beneath her feet. Mama Efua walked around with the same calm smile. To Adwoa, it looked like weakness, like she was winning. But in truth, the old widow had already secured victory without lifting her voice. Each time Adwoa bragged about the future, Mama Efua would silently think to herself, "If only you knew. If only you knew how tightly I've locked every door you are trying to open." And that thought gave her peace. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to fight. She only needed to wait. Because when the right moment came, Adwoa's fake crown would crumble on its own. It didn't take long before Adwoa grew restless. She had been parading around the estate as if she already owned it, but soon she wanted more than talk. She wanted money in her hands. She started whispering into Kojo's ears day and night, planting the idea that he should ask his mother for his share of the inheritance early. "Why should we wait until Mama is gone?" she would say, her voice sweet but sharp. "You are her only son. Everything is already yours. She should give you something now, so we can start our own life properly." At first, Kojo resisted. He knew his mother had worked hard, and he felt uneasy about the thought. But Adwoa was relentless. She would sulk when he refused, sometimes refusing to eat, sometimes accusing him of not loving her. And slowly, Kojo's resolve weakened. He began to repeat her words to Mama Efua in a nervous tone, saying things like, "Mama, maybe you could release some money for us to invest. We'll handle it well, I promise." Mama Efua listened quietly each time, never raising her voice. She knew those words were not truly Kojo's, they were Adwoa. Instead of scolding, she chose a wiser path. She would give them small amounts, just enough to keep them calm, but never enough to touch her real wealth. And every time she handed over money, she made a mental note of what was said, how it was said, and how Adwoa's greed revealed itself a little more. But Adwoa was not satisfied with small sums. She began staging fake emergencies. One day she rushed into Mama Efua's sitting room, claiming Kojo was terribly sick and needed money for treatment. Another time, she cried that her family back home was facing eviction, and only a large sum could save them. She spun stories with dramatic tears, hoping Mama Efua would panic and hand over cash. Mama Efua, however, remained calm. She gave a little, never refusing outright, because she wanted Adwoa to think she was winning, but all the while, she was recording evidence. She kept receipts, noted dates, even wrote down exact words Adwoa used. Quietly, she built a record of Adwoa's manipulations, a collection of proof that would one day speak louder than any argument. Kojo, trapped between love for his wife and respect for his mother, grew more confused. He didn't see the trap he was being dragged into, but Mama Efua did. Each time she looked at her son, her heart ached, yet she told herself, patience. The truth always shows itself in time. Meanwhile, Adwoa strutted with confidence, certain she was slowly draining Mama Efua's riches. What she didn't know was that every false emergency, every greedy word, was tying a rope around her own neck. And Mama Efua, calm and wise, was simply letting her pull it tighter. The day of the family gathering was supposed to be one of joy. Mama Efua had invited her relatives and a few close friends to celebrate the christening of her niece's child. The compound was full of laughter, the smell of grilled meat, and the sound of drums. People were eating, drinking, and sharing stories. Mama Efua moved among them with her usual grace, greeting everyone warmly, making sure the food was plenty and the guests felt welcome. Adwoa, dressed in bright lace and heavy jewelry, was also there, but her presence carried a different energy. She loved attention, and as the drinks flowed, her voice grew louder and her words bolder. At first, she laughed and chatted like everyone else. But soon, she began to speak of things no one expected. Surrounded by a small circle of cousins and friends, Adwoa leaned back in her chair, waving her glass of wine. "You people don't understand," she said, her words a little slurred. "Once Mama Efua is gone, everything will be mine. The land, the houses, the businesses, it will all be under my name." The table fell silent for a moment. Some tried to laugh it off as a bad joke, but Adwoa continued, louder this time. "Kojo is the only son. What belongs to him belongs to me. Very soon, you'll all be coming to me for favors." She smirked as if she were already the queen of the estate. Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. A few quietly pulled out their phones and began recording. They knew words like these could not be ignored. In Ghanaian culture, respect for elders, especially someone like Mama Efua, who had built her fortune with her own sweat, is sacred. For a young wife to speak so openly about taking over before the old woman was even gone was more than arrogance. It was an insult. Mama Efua, sitting across the courtyard, heard every word. She did not flinch. She did not scold. She simply smiled, her eyes calm and steady. In her heart, she knew Adwoa had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Reputation in the family and community is everything. Once people see your greed, you can never wash it away. The whispers spread quickly through the compound. Aunties shook their heads in disapproval. Uncles muttered that Adwoa had no shame. Even those who once defended her began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with such arrogance. Kojo, red-faced and embarrassed, tried to hush his wife, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. By the end of the night, Adwoa's laughter sounded hollow. The same cousins who had clapped along earlier now avoided her gaze. Meanwhile, Mama Efua sat quietly, serving food, sharing smiles, and letting the night pass. She didn't need to say a word. Adwoa had spoken enough for both of them, and in doing so, she had buried her own name. It happened on a hot afternoon, a few weeks after the family gathering where Adwoa's loose tongue had embarrassed her. The compound was quiet, the tenants going about their business, when Kojo and Adwoa stormed into Mama Efua's house. Their footsteps were heavy, their faces tense. Adwoa was leading the charge, her eyes blazing. Kojo followed, his lips pressed tight, looking more like a man being dragged than one in control. "Mama, this has gone on long enough," Adwoa said sharply, dropping her handbag on the table, as though she already owned the place. "Kojo is your only son. It's time he takes control of what is his. We should be managing the estate now, not waiting for later." Kojo shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. His silence was an echo of the battles he had lost to Adwoa's persistence. Mama Efua looked at them both, calm as a still lake. She did not raise her voice. She did not look surprised. Instead, she simply motioned for them to sit. "My children," she said softly, "is that why you came? To take what you did not build?" Adwoa leaned forward, unbothered by the rebellion. "Call it what you want, Mama. But soon, everything will belong to us anyway. Why delay what is inevitable?" That was when Mama Efua stood up. She moved slowly to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick brown envelope. With steady hands, she placed it on the table and slid the documents out. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but every word struck like a hammer. "These are the papers to every property, every account, every investment I own," she said. "And as you can see, they are all locked under a trust, my trust. Nothing can be touched without my consent. Not now, not tomorrow, not even after I am gone. The lawyer has ensured it." Kojo's eyes widened. He reached for the documents, scanning the pages with trembling hand. The legal seals, the signatures, the stamps, it was all there. There was no room for argument, no loophole to exploit. He looked at his mother, his face full of shock and confusion. Adwoa, on the other hand, went pale with fury. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice rising. "You can't do this. You can't lock us out like this. We are family." But Mama Efua only smiled, her calmness unshaken. "Family protects, Adwoa. Family builds. Family does not plot and scheme over another's sweat. You showed me your heart long ago, and I prepared myself." The silence that followed was heavy. Kojo dropped the papers onto the table, unable to meet his mother's eyes. Adwoa sat fuming, powerless, her plans shattered in an instant. Mama Efua stood tall, her wrapper tied firm around her waist. "My estate is safe," she said quietly. "Safe from greed, safe from carelessness. What I built will not be destroyed by impatience." And with that, the battle was over, before it had even begun. Adwoa was not the kind of woman to give up easily. After the day Mama Efua revealed the trust papers, she burned with rage. Her pride couldn't accept that all her scheming had ended in nothing. So she took her plan one step further, straight to the courtroom. With Kojo reluctantly standing beside her, she filed a lawsuit, claiming that as his wife she was entitled to part of Mama Efua's estate. Word spread quickly around Kumasi. People shook their heads, some in disbelief, others in shame. To drag an old widow who had built her fortune with her bare hands into court? It was unheard of. But Adwoa was convinced she would win. She imagined herself walking out of court triumphant, the estate finally in her grip. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Relatives, neighbors, and curious onlookers filled the benches. Mama Efua sat quietly with her lawyer by her side, her face calm and composed, as if she already knew the outcome. Adwoa, on the other hand, walked in dress like a queen, chin high, her voice loud. She spoke as though the case was already heard. But when the proceedings began, reality struck. Mama Efua's lawyer rose and presented the evidence they had quietly gathered for months. Recordings of Adwoa boasting about how she would control everything once Mama Efua was gone. Notes of the fake emergencies she had staged. Even witness testimonies from family members who had heard her drunken rant at the gathering. Piece by piece, the image of Adwoa was painted clearly before the judge, not as a loving wife, but as a woman blinded by greed. The courtroom grew tense as the recordings played. Adwoa's own voice filled the room, laughing and saying, "Once Mama Efua is gone, everything will be mine." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kojo sat frozen, his head bowed, unable to look at his mother. When it was her turn to speak, Adwoa tried to twist the story. She claimed the recordings were taken out of context, that she had only been joking, that everyone was against her. But the judge was unmoved. His face was stern, his voice firm. "This court does not tolerate greed disguised as entitlement. Marriage to a son does not give you ownership of his mother's property. And to harass a widow who has already protected her estate by law is an abuse of the system." Then came the final blow. Not only was the case dismissed, but the judge ordered Adwoa to pay a fine for harassment and wasting the court's time. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Some shook their heads, others smiled knowingly. Adwoa left the courtroom that day humiliated, her dreams shattered in front of the very people she had hoped to impress. Mama Efua walked out slowly, her steps steady, her dignity untouched. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't fought, she had simply let the truth speak. And the truth had crushed Adwoa more deeply than any words ever could. When the court case ended, the shame did not stay in the courtroom. It followed Adwoa everywhere she went. The recordings of her greedy words spread quickly through the family, then through the community. People who once admired her beauty now whispered behind her back, calling her disrespectful and ungrateful. In Kumasi, where respect for elders is sacred, her reputation was ruined. Even her own family could not defend her. At first, they had encouraged her marriage to Kojo, believing she had secured a strong future. But after the case, they felt the sting of embarrassment. Her uncles and aunties began to avoid her calls. When neighbors asked about her, they shook their heads and said, "That girl brought disgrace to her people." Her parents, tired of defending her, told her plainly, "You made this bed, now lie in it." The support she thought she had melted away like morning dew under the sun. Kojo, meanwhile, was left broken inside. Sitting in the courtroom, hearing his wife's own voice plotting against his mother, had pierced his heart. For years he had defended her, telling himself that his mother was just too suspicious. But now the truth stared him in the face. Adwoa had never loved him the way he loved her. She loved the estate, the money, the power. Kojo felt humiliated, not only in front of his family, but in front of the entire community. At home, the tension grew heavy. Their conversations turned into arguments, their silences longer and colder. Kojo could no longer look at her with the same trust. Each time he remembered her words, "Once Mama Efua is gone, everything will be mine," his stomach turned. Adwoa tried to sweet-talk him, tried to blame others, but Kojo's eyes were open now. The marriage began to crumble, piece by piece, like a wall with no foundation. While Adwoa's world collapsed, Mama Efua's honor only grew. People in the community praised her for her wisdom. Market women spoke of how sharp she was, protecting her estate before greed could swallow it. Elders admired her patience, saying, "She fought without raising her voice. That is true strength." Even the young ones looked up to her, learning that age did not mean weakness, but wisdom. Neighbors came to visit her, congratulating her for standing firm. Some even brought gifts, saying, "Mama, you have taught us a lesson we will not forget." Her name became a symbol of foresight and dignity, while Adwoa's name became a warning whispered among mothers to their daughters. Do not let greed blind you. In the evenings, Mama Efua would sit in her courtyard, sipping tea while the sun went down. She did not gloat, she did not boast. She simply thanked God for giving her strength and wisdom. She had saved her son, saved her estate, and saved her peace. And though Adwoa had tried to bury her, it was Adwoa herself who ended up buried, under the weight of her own greed. In the quiet of her compound, Mama Efua often sat under the big mango tree, watching the children of her tenants run and play. Their laughter carried in the evening air, and it reminded her why she had worked so hard all her life. She thought about the battles she had fought, some loud, some silent, and how this last one had tested her more than any other. "They thought my age made me weak," she murmured to herself, her eyes calm and steady. But wisdom is sharper than greed. Adwoa, once so proud, was now a shadow of herself. With her family's support gone, her reputation ruined, and her marriage breaking apart, she was left with nothing but regret. The same lips that once boasted about controlling millions now tasted the bitterness of loss. She had gambled everything on greed, and she had lost it all. Kojo, though heartbroken, had begun to understand his mother's strength. He visited her more often, quieter now, humbled by the truth. Mama Efua welcomed him without anger, for her love for her son had never changed. She only hoped he had learned the hard lesson that not every smile hides love. Meanwhile, the estate stood strong, secured in the trust and sealed in law. Lands, houses, and investments, every piece of it was safe for the generations to come. Mama Efua knew that her grandchildren, and even their children, would benefit from what she had built. And so, the story closed not with bitterness, but with triumph. Mama Efua had proven that no gold digger, no matter how bold, could outsmart the patience, foresight, and wisdom of experience. She had protected her legacy and her dignity without ever raising her voice.